everybody. So today I'm going to talk about how to repot your Darlingtonia. We've been redoing our entire Darlingtonia collection for the last few days, which is a ton of work. Once a bunch of collection gets to a certain size, almost any task that you go to do takes at least a few days. If you're lucky enough to be able to grow Darlingtonia, which can be a little bit tricky, we've done videos on how to grow them before, and we'll do them again, I'm sure. They don't like to be very warm, and that's where people really have trouble with them. But anyways, if you're lucky enough to do well by one, you'll end up pretty quickly with a big pot like this. So Darlingtonia reproduce with runners, and if you've grown strawberries before, you know what runners are. They're creeping stolons or stems underneath the ground that then terminate in new growth points. And so you can see on this one, it started off with a pretty chunky plant in here, but now it's filled up the pot with a bunch of different size runners and stuff in here. And it can be a little tricky to know what to do with this, and you've done so well by it, and you don't want to kill it in the transplanting process. First of all, when is a good time to do it? Right now. We're here in early April, which for us is the beginning of our spring. And you want to do it just as they're starting to grow, but again, before they start to grow. Once there's new pitchers, they'll be very soft and delicate, and you'll be way more likely to shock it up. So we're just going to pull this out, keep the tags, give it a little squeeze, and then immediately you can see all these runners in here. And then I've got a bucket down below for the soil, so I'm just going to start kind of pulling at it a little bit and see if we can get some of the soil out of here before it chokes up our sink. And another good reason is just some Scotch moss here. I hate this plant. It always pops up here and there. Do a pretty good job of keeping it out of everything, but it always pops up here and there. And shake some of this off. Shake it off. That's pretty good. Now we're going to bring it over here to our hose. And we'll just start spraying it off. So water is an excellent way to get rid of old soil. It leaves all the important parts of the plant behind without damaging it and gets rid of all the old peat moss and dirt. Oh, here's the fine. There, that's fine. So now you're starting to see the roots pop up. Again, more and more of those stolons. That's that side. And now you just flip it around. Okay, so now we've got it pretty cleaned off. I'll probably do another bit here, but at least you can see what we're looking at. And I should say, we have a wonderful miracle well where the water comes up basically pure, which allows me to use tap water here. If your water's kind of on the edge, you can definitely use tap water to rinse it off. Like rinsing off with kind of some minerals in it, that's not going to hurt anybody. It's the slow sitting of minerals that can be a problem. And I should have brought a pair of scissors over here, but I don't know if I did. Let's see. This will do. So now the next part I'm going to do, and we'll speed this up too, is I'm just going to cut off some of these old pitchers. All of these pitchers are from last year actually, but some of them are looking pretty funky, and so I'm just going to clean those off. Okay. So that's starting to look better already. And see, we have this long stolon with that guy there. There's also another one just like growing in the middle there. Look at these things. Tom, who works here, is always saying they're like face huggers, and this is a ovipositor, go down and lay eggs inside you. No. Anyways, so these are related to Darlingtonia. Lots of people are surprised to hear that, but these are actually related to related to Sarracenia. Of course they're related to Darlingtonia, silly. But they're related to Sarracenia, and you can see some of that reflected in their roots. They have very similar roots, and you know, Sarracenia makes these chunky rhizomes. They're brown, they kind of look like a potato. Darlingtonia has a different looking rhizome, so you can see there is a rhizome here, this chunky bit there. That takes a long time to form on a Darlingtonia because that's slowly growing out and moving along as the plant grows, and that takes much longer to form. And they often don't have that. Now, as I've talked about before, plants store their energy as starch. And Sarracenia, they're storing all their energy inside of that chunky rhizome. This one has a lot of energy stored in here, but then it also has a ton of starch energy stored into this stolon. And some of you want big plants, and so you could just take this whole thing and put it into a bigger container and let it fill it up, and it will. It'll just keep making more and more stolons. You can see that this plant is actually making stolons off of the stolons, and you can see that those are starting to kind of look like the beginning of another growth point. Now, some of you really want to trade and sell and prop and make as many as you possibly can. And there's two kinds of people, and that's okay. But do yourself a favor and don't chop all of this off. If you take all this off, especially if there's no chunky rhizome here, which often there isn't, you're taking away all the stored energy from this main plant, and very often it will fail. And so, let me grab my scissors again. So when I'm doing this, I mean, that's a perfect plant to pot off on its own. And don't be too concerned if there's no roots. Like on here, I'm not really seeing any roots at all. Usually there are a few roots, but on this one, there's not. I think it's because it was kind of hanging over the edge of the pot. It's totally capable of making new roots. But what we want to do is leave some for the main plant and some for this. And this can be kind of tricky to stick into the pot if it's really long anyways. So usually a good rule of thumb on a plant that size is probably like about, 5 or 6 inches of this runner. And we're going to snip it there. And that's a perfectly great new Darlingtonia. And so we'll toss that one over there for now. There's some other ones in here too. There's a great little propagating one here. This one I think we can cut the whole thing off right here. I'm just going to snip it right there. And you can see that came off really beautifully with roots. And you see how it's hesitant. Sometimes the little pitchers grow up into the mouths of the bigger pitchers. Cannibalism. But you can see that's a perfect little plant. It's got a little chunk of rhizome, it's got some great roots, and that'll have no trouble becoming a new plant. And they do kind of like double in size, or at least there's a major jump after the winter. So on a plant that size, we'll expect pitchers like that size. And you can tell it's spring because those new 2 little red ones are the new pitchers from this year. And again, all this other growth is all from last year. In the wild, if they catch snow, a lot of times they will totally defoliate and look brown. I was just up at $8 Mountain not that long ago checking them out, and I was shocked at how just knocked back by the cold they were. But here, down here in California in beautiful Sonoma County, very often, they still look pretty darn great. There's another cute little plant that we'll pot up. Now, these are all going to be plants for you, and we've done our entire collection. So that means keep checking our webpage because Darlingtonia on the way if you want to try and give this a shot. And again, this thing, I am going to cut this off. I think I'll leave these because these will become new ones, and I'll just cut just right here on that little guy. And then that'll be a new little plant, little root on there. This actually has this big dead chunker hanging off there, so I'm just gonna knock that off. And look how clean that looks. That's a nice little Darlingtonia. And I think that's about it. If you wanted to get really nuts, you could try and start pulling some of these other ones off, and maybe we'll do that off camera. But that can get a little messy, and it's better just to take this nice big chunk and put it in a larger pot. And a good suggestion for a larger pot is actually a styrofoam cooler. They're not the most attractive things in the history of all time, but you can see our large specimens over there have gone into those coolers. And like I hinted at before, they hate getting warm in the roots. That's the worst thing for Darlingtonia. In the wild where they grow, they almost always have cool spring water or snow melt running through their roots all summer. So even on a hot day in California, their roots never heat up. And that's really key to having success with these plants. So if you have an old cooler left over from the 4th of July, that's an excellent place to grow your big ones. Hello again. So here's some nice big ones that we've potted up, like the one I had in my hand. And these are actually the ones that'll be available for sale in the not too distant future. You can use a lot of different mixes actually for Darlingtonia. In the wild, they sometimes grow in serpentine, and when I was a kid, I was like, oh, I'll crush up some serpentine and put that in there. And it actually doesn't improve things that much, and serpentine has asbestos in it, so don't go crushing it up. It's not too good for you or to breathe in. So you can also do them in a Nepenthes mix, basically. That's totally fine. But when I was repotting all of them this year, I was noticing that the ones in the sphagnum, because we keep them pretty wet, it breaks down pretty fast, and then that kind of compresses and it gets kind of mucky. So this year I'm doing them in a nice chunky peat mix, And what we settled in on this year is 5 parts peat moss, 1 part sand, 1 part pumice, and 1 part orchid bark. And it's not an exact science mixing soils, but I think that's a nice mix. I left some aeration in there, but it won't compact over time. And the ones that I was repotting this year, it seems like the ones in a peatier mix did best. And so that's why I decided to change our mix a little bit. But that doesn't mean that you can't grow them in the Nepenthes mix or even a 50-50 peat and perlite. There's probably plenty of people growing them in that too.